Standard textbook explanations for many of Earth's primary features are scientifically flawed, and they can be explained using well-understood phenomena that can unravel the Earth's mysteries surrounding the mid-oceanic ridge. Earth's major components such as oceanic trenches, earthquakes, the Ring of Fire, coal and oil formation, the Ice Age, major mountain ranges, volcanoes and lava, geothermal heat, metamorphic rock, salt domes, the jigsaw fit of the continents, and even the changing tilt of the Earth's axis can be explained by the cataclysmic event of a worldwide flood, whose waters violently burst forth from under Earth's crust. My goal is to reestablish creation and the flood as the defining events for the formation of Earth and its geologic layers and fossils, and to reverse the misinformation and lies that have crept into science education and society in general, to bring glory back to God the Creator and bring the hearts of men to faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Any interested layperson can understand the flaws in the geologic explanations for the Earth's sedimentary layers and fossils, and any layperson can understand the basic explanations of geophysics for a global flood that have vast and unique consequences for the Earth. For example, coal, oil, and methane did not form over hundreds of millions of years. They formed in months. Fossils and layered strata did not develop over 1 billion years. They formed in months. The Grand Canyon did not form in millions of years. It formed in a matter of weeks. Major mountain ranges did not develop over hundreds of millions of years, but in less than an hour. Radioisotopes did not form over 1 billion years and then decay over billions of years to give us a way to calculate the age of the Earth. Most of these radioactive elements came into existence in weeks. And these statements are shocking and considered to be absurd by the people who hold to the evolutionary view. It is a global flood whose waters erupted from interconnected, worldwide subterranean chambers, with a directed energy release focused upward that exceeded the explosion of 1 trillion hydrogen bombs.
Any theory of Earth's geology must explain the sedimentary layers found on the continents and on the ocean floors. What produced them? What was the mechanism? Uniformitarians say billions of years of weather, wind, erosion, coral formation, and ocean evaporation produced these sediments. Hydroplate theory's explanation of sediments is found in the materials of granite and the mantle floor that made up the subterranean chamber. The mechanism was the escaping high-pressure supercritical water, which easily ground and eroded the surfaces of the granite and mantle. So the fountains of the deep were full of tiny particles ground from these two surfaces. In addition to this grinding action, it is important to remember that the granite walls of the widening rupture were extremely unstable, since any rock below 5 miles was now unsupported and therefore was crushed, crumbled, pulverized, and ejected by the high velocity upward flow. Of course, this was happening on both sides of the widening gap. This gap rapidly grew, putting great distance between the now separate sections of the plates, which would eventually become the continents. As the lower structural support washed out, suddenly the upper rock had no support, so it sheared and slid down into the flow with the same pulverizing results. So this accounts for the erosion and particles. But what about the cementing agents? Remember that for centuries, the supercritical water had dissolved minerals from the walls of the chamber, precipitating a mushy blanket of minerals onto the chamber floor, in a process called outsalting. So the escaping water swept up this loose mix of minerals, including limestone, silica, salt, dolomite, and other ores. At the surface, these minerals became the cementing agents that locked sedimentary particles together, forming the sedimentary rocks we know today. Once the eroded sediments and watery slurry of minerals was deposited in thick layers on the surface, the mixture was at low pressure, and as the temperature cooled, over time, after the flood, the minerals in the waters precipitated out of solution and readily locked the crystalline rock grains together, forming sedimentary rock. This is the only explanation which provides adequate reason for why such thick, vast layers spanning continents are found to be so consistent and remarkably pure throughout. All gradual processes involving millions of years fail to explain the thickness, purity, and consistency of these layers over vast expanses. So we've just explained how sedimentary rock was ground and cemented and why the layers are so pure.
If you took all of the world's trees today and converted them into coal, it would not make the amount of coal that's currently in the crust of the earth right now. So if you have mostly landmass before the flood, it's very easy to get enough trees, especially if they're growing bigger and there's a different atmosphere. The entire fossil record of mammals on the topmost layers, they're all giants. All of life was buried in a global flood. Most of the earth today is covered in water, and most of the water that we see on the earth's surface was once under the crust before the flood. This came bursting onto the surface. With all that water coming up comes mud, and it buries all of these organisms. So all of the sediment, the rock and dirt compresses that coal. Just the pressure alone increases the temperature and is able to convert the trees into coal, as well as all of the marine organisms. Because they already live in the water, they're going to be the first to be covered in all of this dirt and mud. Now the fossil record shows fish, amphibian, reptile, and mammals at the top because the flood was covering the earth in sediment from the bottom to the top. So you have the marine creatures, you have the lowland animals, and you have the highland animals. Mud is going to avalanche down into the oceans, and that's going to basically squeeze all of those marine organisms into oil and natural gas.
Biologic evolution heavily relies on the geologic column as evidence to justify the theory that life evolved over eons of assumed time. But if thick layers do represent vast ages of time, why are they not eroded due to exposure to weather? Is there a better explanation for how these layers formed? Are there other mechanisms that explain these layers? Geologists often scoff at a global flood, claiming there should be a layer in the geologic column containing all forms of flora and fauna if it were true. Since there is no such layer, they conclude a global flood is merely a myth. However, they fail to comprehend the true power and forces described in the Genesis account. Few understand the sorting capability of liquefaction, As we'll soon see, many overlook that the entire geologic column is the layer that they are looking for as evidence for the flood. So the no geologic evidence argument appears to be a case of missing the forest for the trees. Anytime objects fall through a liquid or liquid is forced up through objects, liquefaction can occur. The natural result of liquefaction is that it sorts materials according to size and shape. Assume all these objects were the same density. Their shape and size alone would cause them to come to rest in layers as a function of how fluids flow over their unique surfaces. If these same size and shape particles had different densities, however, they could sort much differently without respect to size or shape. Different combinations of these properties for each particle will give different layering sequences. Sharp, even layers can form as particles are sorted by the liquefaction process. As loose sediment particles were laid down in mineral-rich waters during the flood, liquefaction occurred on a global scale in several ways. First, sediments falling through floodwaters experienced initial sorting as we just discussed. In addition, the tidal pull of the moon was unimpeded during the flood, with no continental slopes to crash into. So tides rose and fell up to 200 feet twice a day. High tide forced water down into these loose sediments. Low tide allowed the water within the sediments to rise up through them, while again causing liquefaction and further sorting. Then, as high tide came, the sediments were again pushed back down as the water was forced through them. Realize too that heavy rain and sediments were continuously deposited over time. So as initially sorted layers were buried and protected, the tidal liquefaction process began again on the newly deposited sediments above. This time variable and the phenomena of lensing prevented absolute perfect sorting of the geologic layers by size and shape and density. Rather, patterns of sedimentation tended to repeat. Probably the biggest driver of liquefaction was occurring from forces below the layers as well. The up and down motion or flutter of the granite plates produced extreme wave heights and much liquefaction. Today, liquefaction is observed when only a portion of a continent moves slightly for just a few minutes during an earthquake. Now imagine the effect of an entire continent blanketed with loose watery sediments undulating for weeks. This movement arranged deep sediments more tightly, so the water in between again was forced up through the particles above. During liquefaction, another phenomena is observed that should be realized. As differing sediments were sorted at different times, fine layers of clays and mats of uprooted vegetation were sorted within the layers and became trapped between layers of looser materials. As liquefaction cycles continued to occur, water from below ran into these fine, densely packed layers and retarded the flow up toward the surface. This produced pressure against the dense layer, which lifted all the layers above, producing water lenses within the layers. In this condition, water actually flowed uphill since pressures were lower upslope. Any low-density materials like vegetation or animal bodies were swept along these flows, producing coal seams, oil deposits, and many mixed fossil boneyards uncovered today. Just as particles were sorted by density, shape, and size, flora and fauna were also sorted. This is why so many of the same types of plants and animal fossils are found in the same layers worldwide. It is not evolution over time, it was the mechanism of liquefaction at work. This explains why some fossils are found in, quote, the wrong layers, and why polystrate fossils are found penetrating multiple layers that allegedly formed over millions of years. For one theory, these are expected results. For the other, they are a mystery and therefore must be ignored. In fact, you can see liquefaction and lensing for yourself by experiment. Get a couple of 2-liter plastic bottles and fix them to a teeter-totter arrangement. Fill one bottle halfway with any combination of mixed soil you wish and connect the hose between the bottles. Then add water to the other bottle and slowly tip them. After many back and forth cycles, layers and lensing will appear, until you have this. I saw water lensing between layers in this small scale setup as well. So the next time anyone says the evidence of a global flood does not exist, consider that perhaps the evidence is all around us.